Good morning. We are speaking from National Broadcasting Radio, Radio Nacional Argentina. This is the newsroom in Buenos Aires. My name is Dario Bursztyn. I'm a journalist specialized in geopolitics and international in this house, in the National Broadcasting Radio. And we have been covering every day the situation in Palestine. And due to that, we wanted to speak with the special rapporteur from the United Nations. Her name is Dr. Francesca Albanese. Of course, her name leads us to Italy, our beloved Italy too, but we must introduce her as a doctor graduated in the University of Pisa and with postgraduate studies in London. Good morning for us, good afternoon for you, Dr. Albanese.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, Dario.
Well, the situation in Palestine and Israel is quite difficult to explain because there are many things coming and going, but particularly the population of Palestine, of Gaza, is suffering a lot. Based on your papers, your documents, the official documents you introduced as the special reporter for the United Nations, you have said more than once that the apartheid that is leaving the population of Palestine and Gaza is one of the causes that is producing all the problems. And of course, after this situation that began on October the 7th, things look worse. So as you are part of the official word of the United Nations, please tell us what is going on these days and which is the replies from the international community regarding the apartheid and the suffering of the civilians.
So definitely the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, meaning the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, was already difficult and very severe before the 7th of October. But of course, the 7th of October has thrown us into what I call the ground zero of humanity, because it seems that what existed before has gone, and now we are staring into the abyss of some sort, together with the Palestinians, but also the Israelis. The 7th of October, when Hamas militants emanating from Gaza attacked Israeli civilians, attacked Israel, killing 1,200 people, mostly civilians, injuring almost 5,000 people, and taking 240 hostages. Primarily Israelis, but also foreign nationals. These are war crimes, and I've unequivocally condemned those, asking for proper investigation and accountability. And at the same time, the response that Israel has given, claiming the right of self-defense, which is a bit outside what would have been permitted under international law, has been a very violent action. Israel has started carpet bombing the Gaza Strip, north to south, west to east. 6,000 bombs have been launched every week for 45 days, destroying 50% of the infrastructure, bombing entire residential buildings, schools, hospitals, bakeries, mosques, churches, essential civilian infrastructures like sewage system, water plants, and the tightening, the blockade that already existed on the Gaza Strip, which had already forced many into poverty and despair, because Israel has also prevented, since the 8th of October, of access of water, food, medicines, any fuel, any civilian, any essential supplies, forcing hospitals, to operate without anesthesia. It's been incredible. So, and all this has caused the death of 15,000 people in less than 50 days. 6,000 of the victims are children. 3,000 people are missing. They're still under the rubble. And therefore, the situation cannot be described otherwise than a catastrophe of epic proportions. This is where we are now. So there is the suffering of the Israelis who have clearly who have paid the brunt for an action which was criminal in essence, but at the same time, it is to be considered in a broader context. And now there is the suffering of the Palestinians that is amplified in the context of a military operation, which by and large cannot be described as self-defense.
You said in your reports that you were not allowed to enter and make a field report. The Israel authorities did not authorize you and did not facilitate you any meeting and the possibility to enter in the field in 2022 when you took mandate and 2023. How can this be possible that a national authority does not give permission to an international authority like you are to visit the situation and the population?
Dario, this is not new because Israel has prevented special rapporteurs on the occupied Palestinian territory from entering the occupied territory since 2007. In 2007, my predecessor's predecessor was even arrested and held for 2 days in detention before being deported. So the situation is incredibly marked by disrespect for Israel's obligation as a member of the United Nations. And unfortunately, this is part and parcel of a pattern. Israel has been allowed to violate international law with impunity. And yeah, it's abusing of its powers as an occupying power in the occupied Palestinian territory.
But you have to build a report, and in your reports, you mentioned, for example, that there are at least 700 kids of under 12 years old that are convicted or in prison, and mainly of them are what we in Spanish call retenidos. I mean, they have not a legal charge, but they are still in jail. How can you build your report of this violation of human rights?
Yes, well, first of all, I have to say, I know the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel fairly well because I've lived there. I've worked there for UNRWA for 3 years in the past until end of 2012. And then I've gone repeatedly to the West Bank, no longer to Gaza, but to the West Bank and East Jerusalem almost every year since 2015. And so I know the land. So it's something that I had direct experience. And then thankfully, there is no lack of information on the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory because there are excellent, extraordinary human rights organizations who are Palestinians, Israelis, and international. So they document day in and day out what's the human rights situation there. Of course, I also carry out my own investigations. For example, my first report on self-determination was written without necessarily engaging in interviews with victims because it was around the right of self-determination, which was more of a high-level discussion, so as to contribute to the debate around the two-state solution. Because my point was, how can states discuss the two-state solution without the realization of the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people as a precondition for them to be free and to negotiate whatever there is to negotiate? But then, as of the second report, which I wrote on arrest and detention, deprivation of liberty, then I have engaged in 4 or 5 months of meetings. I went to Jordan and I met with many Palestinians, some Israeli organizations and individuals. And also I've had dozens of remote meetings with individuals and groups, including I've been taken on tours in the occupied Palestinian territory by both Palestinian and Israeli human rights organizations. So I've had a contact with the people on the ground, but remotely, which is not ideal, but is better than nothing. It was also very difficult to speak to the people in Gaza because of the control that Hamas exercises, the fact that there is no freedom for the people. There was no freedom for the people in Gaza, and they were always scared about what they would say because of the high level of control. But nonetheless, this is how I've written my second report, and my third report was about children. And so I've spent the summer over August and September interviewing children. I've interviewed a dozen of children in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, discussing how the occupation is through their eyes, and was really a fulfilling but also very, very painful experience, because you see how the occupation transforms and brutalizes the life of Palestinians since early age.
You mentioned in one of your reports that in 2021, there were 6 NGOs, in Spanish, Organizaciones No Gubernamentales of Human Rights, that were considered terrorists by the State of Israel and were closed. How can this be possible, and which are the ways of an NGO to demonstrate the work they are doing regarding the human rights?
Look, incidentally, the NGOs who were targeted who were designated by the Israeli government as terrorists, they are all engaged in collecting evidence for submissions to the International Criminal Court. These are NGOs who have been engaged on documenting violations of international law by all actors, both occupation forces and Palestinian Authority and Hamas, like the de facto authority in Gaza. And they are considered really the bastions of an international law order on the ground. Now, while Palestinian organizations have been designated as terrorists, Israeli human rights organizations are not given an easy time either, because they have been targeted by smear campaign, personal attacks, and also some measures aiming to defunding these organizations by the Israeli government. So there is an attempt at silencing critical voices who document the abuses of Israeli forces in the occupied Palestinian territory.
You also made a list of the at least 40 resolutions of the United Nations since 1974, saying that this cannot go on any longer, 40, and situation is still going on and is worse. What is United Nations able to do regarding this?
Yeah, I think this is the listing of the resolutions was my predecessor, Michael Link, but I'm glad that our work is seen as seamless, because indeed I think that I've continued his tradition of focusing on human rights topics, human rights violations, not reported on a cyclical basis, but reported so as to explain the overall structure. What is the United Nations doing? The United Nations is completely paralyzed on the situation of Palestine more than anything else. And we have seen it with the recent, let's call it escalation, for lack of better words, as of the 7th of October. Because it has taken weeks to talk of a ceasefire. It has taken even weeks to talk of a humanitarian pause or a truce or a suspension of hostilities, while thousands of people had already been killed in the Gaza Strip. It has been impossible to have a declaration stating that Israel has the right to protect itself. But the right of self-defense, which is what Israel has invoked, it's something different. It's the right to wage a war against another state. And here, Israel has declared a war against the population it occupies. It maintains under belligerent occupation, because this is the status of Gaza. So, and there has also been a crisis at the United Nations also to ensure the protection of humanitarian aid, because humanitarian aid has been used as a tool of war, preventing the access of food, medicines, water in a place that is being bombed. It's horrific. And there has not been a clear, strong position. So the Security Council has been divided, and reflecting also the positions of the position of the United States primarily, and the entire organization has resented it. So it's very difficult for the United Nations to take the lead right now in moving toward an alternative to war. There should be the preservation of peace and stability for both Palestinians and Israelis, but this is not where we are today.
Do you think there is a situation of ethnical cleansing against Palestinians?
I think that ethnic cleansing has been the reality that Palestinians have experienced in Palestine. In Palestine, I mean, in the land that was pre-Israel since 1947, because since 1947, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been displaced. They've been made refugees from modern-day Israel and never allowed to return. So while in 1947-49, during the process that led to the establishment of the State of Israel, 750,000 Palestinians became refugees. And then so this was an instance of ethnic cleansing, which was the removal of a large portion of a population in order to create ethnic homogeneity of another group. This is what has happened in modern day Israel in connection with the creation of the State of Israel. And then this has continued because in 1967, well, first of all, Israel has continued to displace Palestinians from its own state, from the Negev, until 1959. This is fully documented. And then in 1967, when Israel occupied the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, 350,000 Palestinians were also forcibly displaced. They became refugees, no longer allowed to return. And now we risk to see another huge instance of ethnic cleansing because people in Israel, there are military and primarily political leaders who are talking of the Sinai solution, the Egyptian solution. So moving as many people as possible from Gaza into the Sinai. And at the same time, many Israelis are calling for a second Nakba, although they have never recognized properly the first Nakba in the first place, but they are calling for a second Nakba in the West Bank, where over 20 communities have been forcibly displaced as of the 7th of October. And even without these big instances of war, Dario, this has been the reality for many Palestinians throughout the years of the occupation, because Israel has forcibly displaced communities of Palestinians and even Palestinians individuals steadily since 1967, and taking the land to create colonies and forcing them to get into living into more and more confined areas. So ethnic cleansing is a reality in the occupied Palestinian territory.
Regarding that point, yesterday, one of the ministers of the cabinet of Netanyahu said he will propose to the Knesset to give a larger budget to build more colonies or settlements in the famous ABC zone in the West Bank. Can you explain a little bit about the ABC zones and what does it mean regarding the economical power and the water that the C zone has, and why this hurts so particularly the Palestinians?
Yeah. So first of all, let me say, since 1967, Israel has been building colonies, meaning urban and rural settlements for Israeli Jews only in the occupied Palestinian territory, in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And this is against international law because an occupying power cannot transfer its own population in the occupied territory and cannot forcibly displace the occupied population. So this is in Article 49 of the Geneva Convention, which is what Israel has been doing steadily from 1967. Now, since 1993, Israel and the PLO, then the Palestinian Authority, have entered the Oslo Accords, which were part of the peace process, which should have led to the creation of a Palestinian state living side by side as independent and sovereign, living side by side with Israel. So the Oslo Accords were an interim agreement which should have lasted 5 years, and that envisaged the transfer of government authorities from the military power of Israel to civilian power of the Palestinian Authority. This was in the Oslo Accords and was to be followed by new accords. So it was a piecemeal, the Oslo agreements, the Oslo Accords were envisaged as a piecemeal approach. And in these accords, the West Bank was divided in 3 areas. Area A, which is the main towns and cities where Palestinians live. Area B, which is sort of a perimeter, peri-urban areas around the Palestinian towns and cities, and all the rest was Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank. Now, let me say, East Jerusalem has always been considered by Israel as separate, although it's still occupied territory, but Israel has considered it annexed, meaning as part of its own territory, illegally, since 1980. And the Gaza Strip had the colonies until 2005, and then the colonies were removed, but still Gaza remains occupied. And those colonies were removed from the Gaza Strip and moved to the West Bank. So most of the colonies that Israel has built are in Area C. Area C is very strategic because it's the largest area, is the largest surface that allows also the connectivity between the Palestinian controlled, the fully controlled areas, Area A primarily, because Area B is partly controlled by Israel. But it's also the area where all the natural resources are, agricultural land, quarries, access to water. The water basins, because the West Bank is rich in water, the water basins are in Area C, which is where Israel, not accidentally, has built its colonies, because it has built the colonies in order to create facts on the ground, in order to advance its colonization of the West Bank. And in fact, this year, in February, Israel has proposed a government coalition agreement, which is tantamount to annexation, because it has transferred the military power over Area C to Bezalel Smotrich, which is an Israeli minister. So this is a further step toward annexation, full annexation of the West Bank.
It is very difficult for us. We live in a republic. We are in our 40th anniversary of the recovery of democracy in 1983. You are from a country, you are born in Italy, which has a democracy working as a democracy with all the defects any democracy may have. How can you define the government and the state of Israel? And also related to that, how can you consider any possibility of building a democracy in the way we are thinking about it in the West Bank and in Gaza, based on this military and, I assume the word, terrorist, generalized terrorist situation?
Dario, I personally don't get into the terrorism framework because it's not really enshrined in international law. So I skip that. But I can tell you, because Israel is often quoted as the only democracy in the Middle East.
Yes.
Let me say, Israel is a democracy for the Israeli Jews. This is the kind of democracy that Israel is, because the non-Jews, the Palestinians, have less rights inside Israel. And this is enshrined in the law of 2018, which Israel differentiates between citizenship So there are 20% of the population in Israel made of Palestinians, and they are citizens, of course, but not with full rights, because there are full rights only for the Jews. So there are many opportunities, then from building areas to access to education opportunities, job opportunities that are restricted for those who are not of Jewish nationality. So this is the reality in Israel. And the reality is much more complex when it comes to the Palestinians under occupation, because like Israeli journalist Amira As says, several governments, subsequent governments in Israel, even without going to the most to the current government, which is probably the most extreme, the most right wing, but all Israeli governments as of 1967 have acted, as Amira As says, as military juntas for the Palestinians, because the Palestinians under occupation are largely under Israeli martial law, meaning 2,500 military orders that regulate every minutiae of Palestinian life.
Can you repeat the number?
2,500 or military orders that regulate everything from building permits, access to employment, taxation, access to natural resources, traffic, everything. So, and everything is extended by the territory. Then East Jerusalem is under Israeli civil law, but there are emergency regulations that were derived from the British colonial power that apply to the Palestinians only. Then in the Gaza Strip is ruled by Hamas internally, but it's still under full control from outside by Israel, which has retained full control over land, sea, aerial space, electromagnetic space. Whatever enter and exit Gaza is to be authorized by Israel. There is still Israeli currency, the taxation, the population registry. It's all controlled by Israel, including Israel reserves itself the right to carry preventive strikes, so to military target Gaza, which is absurd. And in the West Bank, it's a full display of military rule, because those orders are written by soldiers, applied by soldiers, and adjudicated in military courts by soldiers. So even for traffic offenses, you, as a Palestinian, you go to a military tribunal. Children as young as 12 are arrested, for example, for throwing stones. You know, if a child is caught throwing a stone, he can go to jail up to 10 years if he has just thrown a stone. If he has thrown a stone with intent to harm the vehicle, he can go to jail up to 20 years. So it's a draconian system, and I've analyzed most of the military orders that lead to arrest and detention. And look at this, for example, if you are a Palestinian who participates in a gathering where political issues are discussed, so you have 10 or more Palestinians in a wedding, in a protest, or even in a room discussing something political that it's not authorized by the army, can lead to 10 years in jail. Or being in an area that is considered a closed military area by Israel, like 20% of the West Bank is military closed area, of Area C, can lead to 7 years in jail. So the system is really Kafkaesque. There is no possibility to really exercise freedom under Israeli rule. So without excusing, without condoning or downplaying crimes that the Palestinians might have committed against Israel or Israelis, trying to liberate themselves from this oppressive regime. Most of the cases that lead to arrest and detention are void of offensiveness, in fact.
You, as a lawyer and as part of the United Nations, which would be your first recommendation? If this would be my last question, and this would be your last reply, which would be your first recommendation to begin improving this terrible situation, which is very, very, very near to a dictatorship government?
Look, I've said that from the very beginning, I mean, from the 7th of October, which has pushed us into a new phase, there is a need to stand in solidarity with both Palestinians and Israelis.
Mhm.
Both Palestinians and Israelis are trapped into an anachronistic settler colonial regime, because this is the reality, surely in the occupied Palestinian territory. And the Israelis clearly are raised to fear the Palestinians, to think that the Palestinians are the enemy, are their security threat. The Israelis need to be accompanied out of this system. So any state who calls itself a friend of Israel needs to stop Israel from what it's doing to the Palestinians, because this is the best way to ensure lack of security for both Palestinians and Israelis. And in the long term, I ask for just the application of international law in its universality to both the Palestinians and Israelis, which means recognizing the rights of both to live in peace and security and to enjoy full equality under the law, whatever form of states they have. This is what should be the utmost concern for the international community vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine.
Lastly, is there any possibility that the international court judge Netanyahu or any other person like Netanyahu, because this is the situation today in Israel and Palestine, but you as a lawyer and an international authority know that there are some other situations similar to this, and I don't know if the international court could do really something visible. Let's talk at this point about Netanyahu and his government.
Well, the thing is that Netanyahu, as a prime minister, has a responsibility for what's happening and also for what has happened as of the 7th of October and before. So definitely when there will be finally a proper investigation by the International Criminal Court, who's not been very proactive on this file so far, but apparently now it seems that things are changing and things are moving. Well, I think the chances are chances are that Netanyahu will come under investigation. At least I cannot envisage how what has happened as of the 7th of October goes unchecked. But of course, I cannot confirm what will happen. This is without prejudice to the findings of the court.
Are you hopeful that all the hostages will return to Israel and much more political prisoners will be released from the Israel jails?
Well, the thing is that I don't think that there will be a possibility to really secure that Palestinians are free unless and until there is an end of the military occupation. Because, you know, while Palestinians have been, a few Palestinians have been set free these days, many others have been arrested. And this is what has happened in previous agreements, in previous ceasefires. So the system is very arbitrary. There is a widespread and systematic recourse to arrest and detention as a mean to control and crush the population. This is the reality. So this is the system that needs to be resolved at its roots.
But at this point, are you hopeful the hostages will be released?
Sorry, I missed this. Well, all hostages should be released, and I think shall be released. The point is that, unfortunately, I think that for the Palestinians, this is having the hostages is a tragic bargaining chip, because they have nothing else to negotiate with Israelis, which is horrendous, because this is the reality in which we live. The Palestinians are not free, and not Hamas, but just the Palestinians as a people are not free to fully determine their fate, because it's fully controlled by Israel. So the critical phase now is to liberate all the hostages, let them return home, while not turning the Gaza Strip into a new phase, a new battlefield that will lead to further deaths and to further destruction.
Thank you very much, Francesca. We appreciate a lot this conversation with Radio Nacional Argentina. Our house, our radio reaches all the country. We have 49 stations all around Argentina, and we will share this conversation with all our colleagues. And of course, we hope, as you hope, that the hostages will be released, and many of the political prisoners in the prisons in Israel, Palestinians that are in jail, will be released also. So thank you very much for your time and for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Dario.
Thank you. Bye-bye.